time to sort of invite me here. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I'm going to be sharing highlights of work that took about a year to do. We finished it maybe about a year ago, titled Toward an Internet of Actions. It's really sort of our answer to this question of how does digitization radically change the world. Before I sort of get into that, I just want to say a little bit about the future and how we think about the future and how we use sort of long-range thinking to drive decision-making in the present. So when I talk about the future, we usually mean 10 years out. What we sort of think with 10 years is it's far enough out that it gives you a sense of distance from what you're normally doing, but close enough then to still be relevant. So when you think about sort of futures thinking, we sort of see three high-level value propositions. One is just to ask better questions, to sort of give ourselves space to think and question things, to challenge our own assumptions in a way that you can't do when you're sort of focused on quarterly operations. Of course, we want to do that to discover better answers, to have a better sense of what's possible, and ultimately to drive better decisions, so that what you're doing is not simply an academic exercise, but is really sort of in the service of it shaping how you act in the present. Now, when most people think about the future, certainly when you look at things like science fiction, you see a lot of this kind of imagery, of stuff that's sort of utopian and kind of almost not really real. You could never really imagine this actually existing, this sort of scene really existing in the world. It's sort of more of almost something that's too nice to imagine. Or this space here, the only thing you could do is mess this up. There's no way to make this space livable or habitable. It's just sort of an imagination that could never really exist. So you see a lot of sort of utopian depictions of the future. The other thing that you see is a lot of dystopian depictions of the future, where we're just scared and the robots are taking over or whatever it might be, and it's sort of all in the service of trying to kind of freak us out. Now what we do is a little bit different at Institute for the Future. We really want to look at sort of the messiness that's going to emerge. That for all of the possibility and all of the potential, what we need to remind ourselves is all of this will play out 10 years from now on sort of a day-to-day basis. So this image here is part of, we commissioned this as part of our research on the Internet of Actions, and it's a depiction of a future street corner, 10, 15 years in the future. And just to say, as you look at this, and I'll show this image a few times, that everything in here exists in some form in the present. So you see holograms out protesting on the street, and we've seen examples of this all over the world, or you see billboards that are taking in environmental information and sort of adjusting the advertisements in real time. So just to say, when we sort of actually get to the future, we're going to be getting into a space that's challenging and different, but one that also opens up new kinds of possibilities and new kinds of opportunities if we're willing to look for them. So that's kind of what we're hoping to do in this kind of a conversation, is help you ask better questions, help you think about what are some better answers to those questions, and hopefully help you use them to drive better decision making. So a little bit about IFTF. We're now a slightly more than 50-year-old research organization, intentionally small, so we're about 50 staff members. We were spun out of Rand Corporation, think tank in the US, by a group of researchers who were doing kind of intelligence work, but wanted to be taking sort of methods of intelligence work and making them more publicly available. Some of our founders include Olaf Helmer, who founded the Delphi method for sort of aggregating expert opinion to think about the future. Paul Barron, one of the co-inventors of packet switching, so sort of a real dedication to understanding technology as well as the social implications of technology. And we use this model that we call Foresight to Insight to Action. So for us, Foresight is, again, it's a 10-year distance, something like that. It's far enough out that it gives you a useful sort of space to think differently. Insight is probably at the most basic level a threat or an opportunity. What does this mean for my business? What does this mean for my team? What does this mean for my partners? Whatever that might be, but really out of all of the sort of possible futures, why does this matter to you? And again, this is probably not so much out of a talk like this, but in larger engagements that we do, ultimately the whole purpose of this is not just to have a really interesting conversation, although we hope you'll have an interesting conversation, but it's to drive action in the present. I like to say that we don't want to be evaluated in a talk like this. I don't want to be evaluated in a talk like this by, how right will I be 10 years from now? So in other words, I don't imagine we're all going to get together 10 years from now and you say that guy from Institute for the Future was really correct about everything. I want to be evaluated by how much I'm helping you think about the present. So a little bit just to say we work across lots of different industries, And the things that sort of brings us together is not deep expertise in any one of these fields, but really the ability to synthesize across fields. And that's a lot of what I'll be sharing, is sort of a synthesis across fields. So this is sort of the core question I was asked to think about again, is how does digitization radically change the world? And that's kind of what I'm going to get into a little bit here, is kind of this sort of question of how does digitization radically change the world? And to sort of start, one thing I think is helpful to remind ourselves is just how fast digitization has emerged. That if you sort of take a step back, and I know this is kind of obvious to everyone, but if you take a step back, it's really only been about 20, 30 years, 30 at the high end, where kind of being connected is pretty common. This has been this incredibly fast pace of change, that now it's just sort of ordinary and boring and uninteresting when you go shopping on your phone. It's ordinary and boring and uninteresting when you take a picture from your phone that's better than a digital high-end camera from just a few years ago. It's sort of such a cliche that there's sort of these kinds of stock photos of people who are all sitting around, just, sitting together, but rather than actually interacting with each other, they're all messaging, or they're all looking at the internet, or who knows what, but it's just taken over. That's sort of been the story of the last couple of decades. So when we look out 10 years ahead, one of the first things we need to remind ourselves is simply that change happens really quickly. This is a field in which change happens really, really quickly. So we should need to be prepared for that. So kind of at the highest level, here's our argument of how you might want to think about the next decade. The first sort of thing that you would think about, the first sort of bullet point that we have, is a shift toward an internet of actions. And what I mean by that is that we typically think of the internet as a place you go to get information. You go retrieve information, you look something up, and maybe you buy something. But primarily, being connected is about an information sort of service. And seeking out information won't go away, but increasingly we'll understand the role of connecting things to the internet through their ability to take and shape action. Now, as this is taking place, we need to sort of think about bots, intelligent machines, kind of all sorts of digitally connected things as taking action in our business, social, and civic spheres. And I think the core way to think about this is that the value of these kinds of connected systems is through their ability to shape and orchestrate open-ended action in the world. And that's, I think, pretty sort of simple, it might be a little bit abstract. So one sort of kind of useful way of thinking about this is to think about sort of an autonomous car, so a self-driving car. That's, I think, a very sort of simple example of what we might see emerging as something that the whole point of an autonomous car is that you don't have to drive it, you don't have to pay attention to it. It can theoretically just drive itself. There are lots of technical issues, lots of questions about whether or not this will be feasible in 10 years. But the point is that what we want out of that is the ability to take open-ended action in the world on our behalf. So we did, as part of this research, a fairly deep technical dive with lots of experts, professors, entrepreneurs, those kinds of folks, looking at hardware, computing processes, interfaces. I'm not going to get into the sort of technical weeds of this, but just to say that what we did was looked across the technology stack for combinations of innovations that are emerging to try to understand what's changing. But when you sort of take a schematic or take a diagram like this, what you also need to think about that is all of that being shrunk down into the interface of something like a button. Now, historically, a button is kind of this very simple thing. You press a button, it's a local machine, and you make a smoothie or whatever it might be. But if you look at something like this is something from Amazon, called Amazon Replenishment. They've recently discontinued it, but I think it's still a useful sort of example here. So Amazon's Replenishment service, you press a button, and the way this works is you press a button, and then you would trigger a reorder through Amazon. So let's say you press the Charmin button because you're running low on toilet paper. Think about all the action that is being orchestrated. So now, when you press the button, you're not just making a smoothie. You press the button and you're telling Amazon workers to go and grab some toilet paper for you. You're sort of moving money around between your bank and Amazon. You're sort of triggering back-end systems in a company like Procter & Gamble or Clorox or whoever it might be. All of this sort of actions being orchestrated in something so simple that my 1-year-old son, one of his favorite things to do is press buttons. So we sort of simultaneously need to kind of remember that there's going to be this incredible technical complexity to what we can do, but the ability to sort of shrink that complexity down to incredibly simple interfaces. So as part of this work, we sort of traced out how to think about time horizon innovation here. Many of you have probably seen these sort of cascading S-curves as a way for thinking about innovation. And this is sort of our argument as to how you might think about these three time horizons evolving over the next 10 or so years. First, and this is very much the era of what we're in now, is of connected things, of lots of things just being put onto the internet. Then we'll move toward more like intelligent things with some level of autonomy. And really the long range where we're headed is toward autonomous machine actors. So what this looks like sort of as a practical matter, you can sort of think about this first through something like here. This is a product called glow caps. There are lots of different things like this, lots of different innovation efforts like this. But glow caps is this basically a pill bottle that it has a sort of built-in sensing and timing capabilities so that it reminds you to take your pills. If you forget to take your pills, it starts making alarms at you, flashing lights at you. It's sort of a device embedded with connectivity. It monitors and collects data, and that's kind of where we are now. It's, I think, sort of a good example of the kinds of really interesting and useful innovations we're seeing, but also these sort of very simple, closed-loop, primarily information-driven tools. So this is kind of where the world we're in now. Where we start to head is toward more intelligent things. Now these smart speakers have sort of taken off in the US in this kind of incredible rate. They don't seem to have the same adoption elsewhere in the world as they have in the US. But it's sort of an evolution of today. If you've used one of these things, if you own one of these things, you know that these have a certain amount of machine intelligence, they're aware, they're kind of responsive, but they're still primarily information delivery vehicles. So I own a couple of these. I use them for things like playing music all the time. I use them for things like cooking if I want to set a timer. But they're still basically information tools. But even when you sort of look at something like this, you sort of start to see that there are lots of questions that emerge from connecting things to the world. So what's pictured here are two competing headlines. They're actually the same news story, but they're sort of describe two different worlds, and I think they kind of start to hint at some of the questions we'll face in this world. So the first, on your right, is police ask Amazon's Echo to help solve murder. And on the left, it says, a murder case tests Alexa's devotion to your privacy. Now, both of these headlines refer to a case in the US that criminal case from about a year and a half ago, where the police had reason to believe that the logs from a user sort of talking to an Amazon Echo could be used to verify whether or not this person was guilty of committing murder. And the question that emerges, at least in US law, is how much of this is your information, how much of this is private, and how much of this, because it's in the cloud, belongs to the company and can be shared by Amazon with the police. And just the point of bringing this up, or the point of sort of highlighting this example, is that even in this sort of emerging world, we can start to see that there are going to be lots of questions about which values really matter and how we sort of manage intelligent machines to make the kinds of decisions we want them to make. And finally, where we'll be headed is toward a world of autonomous machine actors. We can sort of start to see distant possibilities of this, and it will kind of give us a sense of what to expect within the next decade. I think of these not as sort of in isolation machines, but networks of intelligent machines coordinating and acting together on our behalf. I think these as prominent actors that are really generating new kinds of value in the world, and that's sort of where we need to be sort of imagining the possibilities. Now, what's pictured here, I think, is one interesting example of where you might sort of imagine seeing something like this, and I think it's a good example, or good what we'd call a signal, an early innovation of something like this taking place. It's a service called Trim. And what Trim will do is it will sort of monitor your cable bill. So in the US anyway, the way cable companies work is they sign you up for a year-long contract. After a year, they raise your rates. And then if you remember to call, you can get your rates back down through another contract, but if you don't, you pay more. So what this bot does is it just monitors your cable bill on an ongoing basis for you. And if it sees that there's an opportunity to buy a lower priced package for you, it just goes out and buys it on your behalf. And the business model of this bot is that they take 25% of the savings to fund their operations and profits, and you get 75% of the savings. So think of that as just sort of one example of a new kind of innovation. I would think of that as sort of a negotiation bot. Now, the way we like to think of it is sort of through this kind of a lens, that, everybody sort of is thinking about and working on the digital assistant. But realistically, there may be like 5 to 10 companies in the world that are going to really have a good chance of being the leader in digital assistants. Amazon, Facebook, Apple, a couple of Chinese companies, there are 5 to 10 companies that could really do this well. And then that's about sort of the innovation landscape for digital assistants. But if you think beyond digital assistants, you can come up with something like a negotiation bot that has this very limited task of negotiating on your behalf for your cable bill and for a few other things. So sort of as you think about the opportunities in this world, one of the challenges you might ask yourself is, if I sort of reframe this away from being, an assistant toward being a tutor or a nurse or a shopper or a coach, what might this look like? What new kinds of opportunities would emerge if I reframe this a little bit for myself? So that's kind of the big picture landscape of the next decade. One other question we'd encourage you to ask as you're sort of thinking about this is a question that we don't typically ask in technology, but I think is becoming more and more critical and is becoming more and more common to hear asked. It's a question about values. What value do you want your technology to optimize for? Now, I know that's kind of an unusual question in the technology space, but I think it opens up interesting innovation opportunities if we can ask ourselves that question. So this is my first time here in Bangkok, here in Thailand. I've had a little bit of a chance to look around, a little bit more of a chance to look around tomorrow. But one thing that's a little bit different when you travel is you kind of want to navigate the world a little bit differently. So what's pictured here is a demonstration project from Yahoo Labs a few years ago. And it sort of helps, I think, highlight the different ways that you can use this question of what do you value to come up with new kinds of innovation opportunities. So, for the most part, most of us, most of the time, want the shortest route, and that's A. But maybe you're like me, maybe you're traveling, you're in a new country, a new city for the first time, so maybe you're not walking for efficiency, you're just walking to look around. So in that case, what this team at Yahoo did was they used photo data from Flickr to identify different sort of ways that you can navigate the city based on what they assumed would be the most beautiful route, which, doesn't want the most beautiful route. Maybe you're trying to have a hard conversation with somebody, or you want some quiet time to think. Well, then you can go on Route C, the quiet route. And I don't exactly know what makes a route happiest, but who doesn't want the happiest route? That sounds like a lot of fun, right? So maybe you just want to go on the happiest route. Now again, I think for the most part, most of the time, most of us want the shortest route. And so we almost don't question that that's the only way to go about navigating the city. But if you give yourself space to kind of open up and take a step back and say, what other value might my innovation optimize for? You actually open up some really interesting opportunities. So that'd be the other question I challenge you to sort of ask yourself as you're thinking about this. So again, that's kind of the high-level picture, and now what I'm going to sort of get into is sharing what we call 4 strategies for really thinking about how you might act in this world. Just again, as a reminder, I think it's just like showing this image because, it depicts sort of some of the complexity and some of the nuance that will be emerging. And sort of imagine anything you think about doing is sort of emerging in this kind of complexity. So again, I'm going to highlight 4 different sort of innovation spaces, or what we call strategies for action in this world. The first is what we're calling altering human perceptions. And this is really kind of sort of a confluence of 2 things. This is really a combination of 2 things. The first is all of the different sort of emerging technologies that give us new ways of interacting with the world, new sorts of augmented reality headsets or kind of mobile devices, all the different ways that we sort of might take in information that will continue to evolve and get innovated upon and sort of shift how we navigate the world. The second is less from the technology space and more from the social science space. So this is coming out of fields like psychology, behavioral economics, all these fields that are giving us new windows into how people think. neuroscience, I guess, would be another one. All these new fields that are giving us windows into how people understand the world, how we're not rational all the time, but lots of little things about environmental triggers shape how we think. My favorite little example of this is there's some good documented evidence that that hot cups make you, if you have a hot cup, it makes you feel warmer to the person you're talking to, and if you have a cold cup, it makes you feel more distant. The endpoint logic of that is if you're going for your performance review with your boss, make sure to go out for coffee and not for, iced coffee, I guess. Have warm drinks together because you'll feel better about each other. So anyway, this is sort of all out of that field of how does psychology change how we navigate the world. Now, my favorite sort of example of this is this image. And it depicts just how embedded default mindsets and default thinking are into our world. So it's a little grainy, but what you see there are people taking the escalator up to go to the gym. And you sort of stop and think about this, why on earth would you take an escalator up to go exercise when there's a perfectly good set of stairs that you can walk up as part of your exercise? And the answer is that we don't think about it. We just sort of default to whatever is natural, whatever seems like the sort of path that's been designed for us. So the question is, how do you take sort of all the sort of emerging tools, things like augmented reality, Internet of Things, wearables, all these sort of new ways we have of interacting with the world, and use them to shape people's perceptions in productive ways? So this is kind of a much more elaborate depiction of a lot of that sort of logic. A researcher and designer went through and sort of documented all of the different cognitive biases that we have. All of these have some kind of Wikipedia article associated with them, meaning there's enough peer-reviewed evidence to support them. I'm not going to try, by any stretch of the imagination, to explain this whole diagram, but you can see that there are things like biases, like we need to act too fast, there's not enough meaning in what we're looking at, there's too much information, so we default to something easy. That's one of my favorite ones, is too much information. Apparently there's really good research that people inordinately value cup holders when making car purchases, specifically because cars are too hard to evaluate, so we all pay attention to cup holders. So anyways, we just have all of these sort of different biases in our world. Now the question is, how will that change as we move into this world of things like augmented reality? So I mentioned ghost protests, and what's pictured here was the first ever ghost protest. You can see people protesting in holographic form. This was in Madrid, Spain. So the sort of story behind this is that the Spanish government passed a law that made it illegal to protest in front of government buildings. However, they did not make it illegal for holograms to protest in front of government buildings. So that's sort of what this organization did, was they created this holographic protest. And even just at this simple level, for me, what it gets me thinking about is these things like that, that we're very clearly moving into a world of good augmented reality. And we're very sort of quickly going to need to figure out what information can you stick in front of a building? What information can you stick in front of a religious house or a religious institution or a government institution? Who has the ability to put information in different places? If I work at Facebook, can I put job ads in an augmented reality field over Apple's headquarters because I'm trying to recruit Apple's engineers? We just sort of very quickly start to have all these questions about how do we interact with this world. Now, the other thing I think that's emerging is this really sort of quick ability to shift how the world sees you and to sort of project your presence into the world. So this will flip around in just a second. This is a quick video. I shot this in my house in real time with an app that I believe cost $1, if I recall. And what you see, that's me, and now you see my face in Barack Obama's face, and now you see Barack Obama again. Now nobody would believe, of course, that I was Barack Obama. That's not a credit. That doesn't make you think, oh, that Brad turned into Barack Obama for a brief sliver of time. But I think it does give a sense of just how much you'll be able to manipulate digital information, digital presence, that I can do that for 99 cents in my house in real time with no editing, gives a sense of just how easy it's going to be to manipulate any kind of image, any kind of face, any kind of digital information at some point in the next decade. So the question then to challenge yourself with is how do you do this in ways that are helpful for people? How do you do this in ways that are responsible? How do you do this in ways that add value? So here's, I think, one answer. What's depicted there on the left, the woman looking at herself in the gym, is something that we call an artifact from the future. It's sort of our artistic depiction of what a future might look like or feel like. And then what's on the left there is a real product from Bank of America that was around for at least a couple of years. So let me sort of tell you what's going on here. So what you see with the one on the left is she's trying to imagine getting healthier. And I think we've kind of all been there where it's like, you know you should work out, but the effects of, doing one workout, you don't, as much as you wish one workout would make your arms big and you'd lose 5 pounds because you did, 100 push-ups or something, that's not really how it works. The way it works is that sustained effort over time makes you healthier, but it's really hard to stay motivated. So you can see this woman's looking at herself in the mirror and she sees that, if I could just work out for 60 minutes, 3 times a week. Over 2 months, I'd be, my skin tone would be better, my arms would be leaner, I'd feel better. It's sort of based on this research done by a Stanford professor named Jeremy Bailenson, who's documented something that he calls the Proteus effect. And what the Proteus effect has found, or what Bailenson and his teams have found, is that when you see yourself in digital avatar form, it makes you motivated to do certain things, to sort of behave differently. And so you can see her, and she's saying, well, I'm going to behave differently because I see a version of myself that I like in her. Now, the real-world application of this is, again, from Bank of America / Merrill Lynch. And the question that they're trying to get you to grapple with is, wouldn't it be nice if you had more money in your retirement account? Now, I don't know how retirement works here, but in the US, most retirement is privately funded. Most people radically underfund their retirement accounts. And so what they've asked you to do is upload a picture of yourself. They'll age you 20 or 30 years. And then they say, wouldn't 20-year older version of you really like to have some money for retirement? And the answer is the 20-year older version of you would really like to have money for retirement, and it encourages you to save more. So again, this question with altering human perceptions is how do you take these tools and really use them in ways that are beneficial to people? And that's for the challenge I'll be for that one. Now, our second strategy is what we're calling animating objects and environments. And the first one is really about how do you sort of take kind of digital information and overlay it on the world. The second one is about how do you sort of think about any sort of specific location, like a room or a meal or any sort of discrete activity, and enhance it through digital connectivity. Now, my favorite sort of jokey project, and this was an art project out of MIT's Media Lab, it's almost 10 years ago now, so it's pretty obvious they're not going to commercialize any of these. And when I tell you what these are, you'll understand why it's pretty obvious they're not going to commercialize any of these. But this team had this interesting question of what could you do if you connected a wallet to the internet? How would you change a wallet if you connected it to the internet? So they came up with 3 different ideas. Again, not great product ideas, but I think good for thinking with. The first is what they call the Bumblebee. The sort of idea with the Bumblebee is that most of us don't primarily work in paper cash anymore. We mostly work through digital transactions. And so the Bumblebee would sort of buzz as the money hit your bank account, buzz as money left out of your bank account. It was just sort of designed to give you an awareness of what was happening in your finances beyond what you had in your sort of paper wallet. So that's probably the most sort of reasonably useful one. The second one was what they called the Peacock, or the second one of them was called the Peacock wallet, and that would grow or shrink, basically based on how much money you had in your account. The idea was that to show off like a peacock, like peacock feathers, if you had a lot of money. And then the third was what they called the Mama Bear wallet, and the idea was with the Mama Bear wallet was you could set sort of a spending limit on your account, and if you started hitting that spending limit, there were hinges built into your wallet that made it harder and harder to open and take money out to spend. Again, not great product ideas, but I think interesting to think about what you can do with something simple like a wallet. Now, I'm going to sort of go through a different kind of model and sort of challenge you to think about food. Now, McDonald's famously, in the US anyway, one of the things that they really sort of innovated in the 20th century, in the 1960s and beyond, was realizing that it wasn't time thinking about what's the way to design our spaces to bring people in to the setting. Now, what we might want to think about is sort of how do we sort of take that kind of logic of the attention to design, attention to space, and sort of apply it to a different kind of world. So one of our researchers wrote about this for us, and he said, in the midst of any eating experience, the story of the place, the utensils, the lighting, the music, and the overall ambiance, we have the potential to integrate those in really unprecedented and innovative ways. So now I'm going to go through a sort of similar exercise to the wallet exercise. And these actually are all real products. Some of them more successful than others, but they are all real products. So the first is what's called the Happy Fork. The Happy Fork is like a diet fork. So one pretty interesting sort of documented research out of fields like public health is that the speed at which you eat contributes to whether or not you're obese. So if you're just shoveling food into your mouth, you're more likely to gain weight. So the way the Happy Fork works is if you start just shoveling food in, it vibrates to try to get you to slow down. And now this hasn't been super successful, but it's more successful than you might imagine that kind of a product being. This not very successful because it's more of a marketing stunt, but this is a pretty interesting one. Cinnamon, I don't know if you have Cinnamon Toast Crunch here. Cinnamon Toast Crunch in the US is sort of a really it's a cereal designed for kids that's super sugary, and most people don't want to feed it to their kids anymore, so they're trying to kind of reframe their audience to, I think, 20-somethings. So the idea with the Cinnamon Toast Crunch selfie spoon was you could take a picture of yourself while eating your cereal and upload it and hashtag it and all that kind of stuff. Again, more of a marketing stunt, but an interesting product to think about what would a fun spoon, what would a sort of spoon sort of optimized for fun and sociability look like. And this third one is something called the Liftware Spoon. And this is, I think, what you might think of as a spoon optimized for dignity or a spoon optimized for health. This is a real product. It was developed a few years ago and has since been bought by Google. But it highlights, and I'll show a video in just a second, of thinking about how you might reimagine something very simple like a spoon and reimagine it for somebody who has tremor. So let's see if we can get this video playing.
A tremor, whether from essential tremor or Parkinson's disease, takes away from this experience, forcing people to focus instead on the basic task of eating. We decided to create something that would allow people to go out to restaurants or simply enjoy a meal without stress. We invented the Liftware stabilizer to make it easier to eat with hand tremor and take the frustration out of eating. For the first time, we have the technology to actively stabilize a utensil in a device so small it fits in your hand. The Liftware device works by sensing a person's tremor and intelligently stabilizing itself to make the food's journey from the plate to the mouth much easier.
So for me, I think that's a really interesting and really kind of productive example to think with of just all the kinds of innovation opportunities that might emerge from just these very sort of simple objects. So in this case of this spoon, it's a couple $100, so it's expensive for a spoon, but it's a lot cheaper than having to pay a caregiver to feed you, which is what a lot of people with Parkinson's and tremor have to do. And you have a lot more dignity and a lot more sort of self-efficacy if you can feed yourself than if you have to have somebody feed you. So for me, it's a really kind of amazing example of sort of thinking about how can you animate a very specific object for sort of this kind of, different kinds of purposes. Now, just to say that I think that this is also going to be a really hard question, and it's going to take years of sort of thinking through different interaction designs, different sort of models, and it's going to require a whole new literacy to figure out how do we design different objects in this world. So what's pictured here is a patent filing from Uber from about a year ago now, or it became public about a year ago. I'm not exactly sure when they filed the patent. But it's Uber's patent of what they might, of how they imagine a self-driving car working in the real world. Sort of all of the interaction designs that you would build into a self-driving car. So you see things like this sign there that says, please proceed to cross. You can see that the car can actually project out a crosswalk in real time so that it can tell you where to cross. My favorite thing, which is sort of a weird, really kind of odd thing here, but I think makes a lot of sense when you think about it, is that they include virtual holographic drivers in their patent. Now the reason that is if you think about it, so if you want to know if you should cross the street, you kind of make eye contact with the driver, and they make eye contact with you, and they go, okay, they've seen me, I'm going to walk across the street. And if you don't make eye contact, you're like, better hold off. So what this hologram can do is it can make eye contact with a pedestrian to give the same kind of social cue, or at least that's the patent filing. I'm not sure how advanced they are with the technology, but the patent filing is the hologram will make eye contact with you so you can cross the street. Again, I think we're just going to have to think very creatively about what kinds of interaction design models make sense in this world, because when you think about something like that, it does make a lot of sense, but for most of us it wouldn't seem intuitive to say, oh, well, of course you need a hologram in the autonomous car. So that's kind of the challenge, I think, of this one, is how do you think creatively about design? Now this third area is what we're calling encoding human activity. And this is really about taking all of the stuff we do in the world, all kind of our activity, all of our sort of logic and legal rules, and making them machine readable. Now, I don't know, I know this varies different countries, different places. In the US anyway, there's sort of what you might think of as the legal speed limit, and then what you might think of as the social speed limit. So the legal speed limit, let's say here, is 25 miles per hour on this sign. The social speed limit in the US is probably about 30 miles per hour. It's sort of understood that you can speed a few miles above the speed limit. You're technically breaking the law, but the reality is you're not going to be pulled over, you're not going to get a ticket, you're within the social speed limit. So that question of the legal speed limit versus the social speed limit has come up in the context of Tesla's semi-autonomous cars, the cars that can drive autonomously on the freeway. So they did this sort of interesting thing when they first released the autopilot function on the cars. They first allowed the cars to speed 5 miles per hour with the speed limit, what you would think of, again, is sort of within kind of social dynamics, even though technically illegal. Then, realizing that they were effectively allowing all of their cars to break the law, they said, well, maybe we should make the cars, by law, by code, drive the speed limit. And then, all of their owners got really angry and said, by forcing us to drive the speed limit, you're endangering us because all the other cars are breaking the speed limit. So Tesla sent another update to their cars, allowing them all to speed. And the point here is that as we sort of move into this world where we want machines to be acting, we're going to need to be really explicit about what the rules are that we want them to follow. Now again, I showed this sort of earlier, this example of this bot that you can use to negotiate your cable bill. This is a screenshot from my email. I used this for a while to negotiate my cable bill, and it gives you this sense of something else that's going to happen once we make everything machine readable, which is that information economics is going to change in really interesting and really radical ways. So if you think about this from the perspective of Comcast, this cable company that is charging small fees, $5, $10 extra per month if I don't sort of constantly monitor my bill. $5 a month is not much to me. I'm not going to pay close attention to it. I certainly don't want to lose a few dollars a month, but I'm not going to spend an hour on the phone with a customer service agent trying to sort it out. On the other hand, for Comcast, if you add up that $10 over 50 million customers, that's a lot of money per month. So what this bot effectively does, by negotiating on my behalf, is it really changes the way the information economics works. That all of a sudden there isn't a huge advantage to being huge in the same way. That those kinds of little hidden fees and things like that are really much less viable in this world. And I think we're going to see this play out in some really interesting ways, and really across sort of legal and contract issues, and kind of interesting, fascinating, and really challenging ways. So Equifax, the big credit scoring company, one of the big credit scoring companies in the US, had one of the worst data breaches that I've seen, I think, in sort of following this space a couple of years ago, where something like 100 million customers had their personal data breached by this company that they'd never turned their personal data over to. It's just this company that sort of sits in the background tracking people. Now, what Equifax did, they did this kind of very questionable thing, was they put up a website where you could sort of check to see if your credit and information had been breached. But by agreeing to go to their website, you had to click a box that said, I will not sue Equifax for breaching my data. I think, pretty questionable thing. So this really fascinating Stanford, just graduated from Stanford, developer has a company called Do Not Pay, the Do Not Pay bot. And it's an effort to sort of create legal services that anybody can use free of charge, because in the US, if he charged you money, he would have to be a lawyer, which he's not, he's just a coder. But free of charge legal services that anybody can use for sort of individuals to sort of sue these larger organizations. So this is a series of screenshots. This is again something I did. I'm not going to show you all of it because I had to put in a bunch of personal information. But in California, you can sue Equifax for $10,000 for breaching your credit data. And I think there are about 7 or 8 screens that look roughly like that I put in my information, and it automatically generated a lawsuit for me to file in small claims court against Equifax. I think what's again interesting about this is when you think about sort of contracts in this world, a lot of the gaps that sort of exist between sort of people and entities with lots of information and sort of individuals are going to shrink. Now, just to say this isn't only a contract story, and this isn't only sort of a story about big versus little, but a story about how we're going to handle lots of information coming at us in ways that are going to be really hard to figure out what to do with. This is the first example of the FDA, the U.S. Federal Drug Administration, approving an algorithmic diagnostic tool that didn't need human oversight. So basically, the upshot of this is that there's certain kinds of diseases that you can see that first manifest in their eyes. In this case, they were looking at diabetic retinopathy. But there's certain kinds of diseases that first manifest in very subtle changes in your eyes that might be hard for a doctor to see, or you're not in the physician's office, but is very accessible through photo data. And we're going to see more and more of this kind of thing. That if you see the doctor maybe once a year, once every couple of years, they see you for 10 minutes, they certainly don't have time to diagnose you for every possible thing that you might have. But there's lots and lots of stuff that's really useful information that's sitting right there on your phone and accessible through your photo data. You think about, I see a dermatologist on a semi-regular basis because we have a family history of skin cancer. All sorts of photos of me that you could track on an ongoing basis to see if there are moles that are changing. So very suddenly we have to sort of think about, how do you do this? Do you just want an alert on your phone one day that's sort of like similar to one of those notifications that you ignore that says, hey, you might have cancer? Probably not. But how else do you do it? What are the limits to what can be analyzed? I think there are lots of opportunities here, but lots of questions about how you do this well. So those are the first 3. The final strategy that I'm going to share is what we call manipulating matter. And manipulating matter is again about how do we sort of build machines that are going to be interacting with us in the real world. Now, one way I like to think about this is again through these sort of autonomous, these sort of smart speakers that we have, and I think they give a hint as to where this is headed. That's my wife, my oldest. I have 2 children now. Time I had 1, and her doll. A couple of years ago, I'm lucky enough that I get to travel on a pretty regular basis. A couple of years ago, I was in Switzerland, in Basel, really, really gorgeous place. And my daughter at the time was about 2. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to like FaceTime with a 2-year-old, but it is rough going to FaceTime with a 2-year-old. They really want to talk to you, but they have like 5 words that they know, so they can't really talk to you. And there's not a whole lot that you can say because games don't work. I have a 1-year-old now. I've been trying to play peekaboo with him over FaceTime, and he just doesn't understand what I'm doing. So I was at home. I was in Basel. My wife was at home with our daughter. She was just trying to get some housework done while I was FaceTiming our daughter, and my daughter was chasing after her. And so I go, Alexa, play Johnny Cash. And halfway around the world, all of a sudden, Johnny Cash starts playing at my home back in San Francisco, all the way from Europe. That's pretty amazing that now I can just make music play at my house. My wife doesn't like Johnny Cash, so she had to shut it off, but whatever. So anyway, fast forward though a couple of years, and now as we're connecting things to the internet, there's all this stuff that you can do for good and for bad, and there are going to be questions about how to do this well. So this is a headline from a news story from a few months ago, where just sort of out of the blue, this house was hacked. It's not clear why, it's not clear who did it, but the Nest camera had a security issue with it that allowed people to sort of take over the camera and start to make announcements, say things. I guess the person on this Nest camera something about how the US was going to attack North Korea as retaliation for a North Korean attack on the US, and people were like, what's going on? No, nothing else is saying this, but they were just in terror for a few minutes. So there's obviously some real challenges in this. But when we sort of think about this, and that's today, what we're going to need to be thinking about is much more coordination between machines and sort of where are the limits on what we allow and how do we do this well. So this is an image from a researcher, or a video from a researcher at UCLA who we interviewed, Nora Ayanian. And what this is showing is drones coordinating and collaborating without any kind of central entity telling them how to work together. So we're going to sort of be in this world where lots and lots of stuff can be coordinated, and the question is sort of what are the limits, what are the rules, how do we sort of make this come together? Because you can do pretty cool things, but there are also going to be questions about how do we make these work in ways that make sense. So this quick video, this was a project, this was not sanctioned. It was sort of an engineer, I think he worked at Cisco, had a Tesla, had an Amazon Echo, and had an automatic garage door opener, and he thought, wouldn't it be fun if I could make all of these work together? So he did some, again, not legal, but not totally illegal hacking of his systems to put together this system. It was a quick video. Audio's a little funky, but I think it's worth looking at.
Alexa, ask Kit to pull the car out of the garage.
I will not pull your Tesla out of the garage. Keep an eye on it.
So, to me, that's kind of an amazing thing that this guy put together, that just kind of through a little bit of coding, he was able to literally get his car to pull itself out of the garage through a voice command. And I think that gives a sense of some of the potential here. But it also gives a sense of how the challenge of thinking about this, or the challenge of doing this well. Because you know the Amazon Echo, it doesn't have the ability to distinguish between different voices. So it can't tell if I'm talking, or if my wife is talking, or if my daughter is talking. What that effectively meant in this person's house was that, as a joke, his kids kept pulling his car out of the garage. And so he had to turn the whole system off because he didn't want his kids to be able to pull his car out of the garage. So for me, it's sort of an interesting example of this sort of tension of this world. I think of both where the opportunities are, but where the pitfalls are, of figuring out what the kinds of right interaction models are with the sort of opportunity, what we want to enable and what the limits are of what we might want to enable. So that's kind of the broad landscape of what we're looking at with this research on the Internet of Actions. I want to just leave you with a few sort of insights, a few takeaways that I would sort of suggest you sort of consider when thinking about this work, or when, if I were to say, like, what are the key messages out of this? The first is look at combinations of technology to inform long-range strategy. So often we'll get, questions or inquiries, or what's the future of AI, or what's the future of 5G, or the future of robotics, or whatever it might be, the future of the Internet of Things. But really what we did in this work, and what I would encourage you to do in your own sort of planning, is not think about any one technology. Obviously you need to understand, all sorts of technical details about 5G to understand how long it will take to implement, and some of the barriers, and all those kinds of things. But to really, when you're sort of doing long-range forecasting, look at how combinations of technology will come together. Because that's where there are really rich opportunity spaces, is through those combinations. Explore innovation opportunities by thinking about different kinds of value systems. So again, if you think about something as simple as those different spoons that I showed you, a spoon optimized for fun, or a spoon optimized to help somebody eat, versus a spoon optimized for encouraging diet. Those are all three different interesting kinds of innovation opportunities with a very specific, simple object. Or think about those maps that I showed you, of not just the shortest route, but the happiest and most beautiful and quietest route. Those are all different kinds of opportunity spaces. So if you take a step back from what you're doing and say, what value do I really need to optimize for? You'll have new kinds of opportunity spaces. And then finally, I think we're going to be, over the next decade, grappling with this question of how do we balance automation and human oversight? And it's not going to be one answer all the time. It's not going to be one answer for every system or every machine or every region or whatever it might be, but that we're going to really sort of have to challenge ourselves to think about what's sort of this optimal mix of machine learning and human capabilities. What's the optimal balancing of these tools? So that's kind of my core messages for you, and thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bradley. I think your presentation is quite inspiring. If you consider the fact that now in Thailand we have these sort of political issues, I think the Telegram protest that was done in Spain would be a very inspiring sort of ideas for a lot of young Thai people. We're waiting for some questions from the audience. As always, it's too early.
Okay.
I've got some questions for you.
Okay, sure.
It seems to me that the main focus of the entire thing would be based on human creativity, because technology can be done using, I don't know, technical know-how and anything, especially when the movement of digital sort of device is increasing dramatically. But at the end, we come back to how individual can come up with ideas. So from the last, let's say, 5 or 10 years, have you seen some sort of the ratio of the increasing of the creative ideas using digital platform or device in a creative way?
That's an interesting question. So I think, I don't know if I've seen a change in the ratio of, say, creative, but I think that's a really good insight that you're pointing out of, I guess one way I think about this now is through the way that our relationship to mobile phones has changed. That for a long time, there was a few years where it was, the biggest news story for a week, or the biggest news story in technology for a month, when the new iPhone or the new Samsung or the new Huawei phone or whatever it might be came out. And now it's just like, oh yeah, like my phone is old, I should buy a new one. But nobody's really excited about the screen or the battery or whatever. We kind of sort of become a commodity. And I think it's a long way of saying that things get commoditized very quickly in the digital world, and it becomes very hard to just compete on sheer technical stats. So where I think you see the most interesting innovations, and where I do think a lot of what I was trying to convey is that if you can sort of think a little bit more creatively and systematically about where the opportunities are, and not just purely, make the thing more efficient. Because that's the one that we all go to, is make the thing more efficient. And that will always be a good innovation opportunity. Make the thing more efficient will always be a good innovation opportunity, I think. But there's lots of other things that you can do when you say, make the thing more sociable, make the thing more creative, make the thing more fun. And so where I think the biggest, if I were to say where the opportunities are, it's to push beyond the obvious and to look for creative solutions.
All right, okay. Thank you very much. Please, everyone join me to thanks Mr. Bradley once again. Thank you very much. Oh, you got a question?
Yes, hi Brian, this is Pasek from IELTS. So I'm quite impressed when you mentioned about the Internet of Actions, and you gave a lot of examples from autonomous car and Tesla. So that was the news last night that Tesla is going to sell that in-house insurance. So I have two questions, because I come from insurance company, of course. How do you think why Tesla completely get into the Disney business? And that's the first question. And the second question is from the slides, you have some clients from automakers like GM, Toyota, Honda. How would those major players gonna react to this move?
Okay, and I will give the caveat that I haven't had a chance to closely read what Tesla's up to with insurance yet. So I will give the caveat that I'm not totally informed about this yet. But my sense is, a couple of things. So often people, when they're looking at autonomous cars, think that naturally you might not want to own one, or if you owned one, you would want to rent it out as a service. So Tesla has talked about this idea that if you owned a Tesla and it's charged and it can drive itself, why not just send it on the road? It can operate as an autonomous taxi, and then it can drive itself back to your house. Now, Elon Musk is pretty famous for having big visions that take a lot longer to come to reality than the reality of things. So he claims that's, a few years away. I think probably most people would say it's longer than a few years away. But part of what they're doing is they're setting up the insurance for a different kind of ownership model. I think that's what you've seen a lot of. I know when Google under Waymo has explored autonomous cars, they've at least definitely publicly stated we might just insure them ourselves because we can vouch for the quality, we have the money, we can then just own a fleet of autonomous cars and insure them, and we don't need to worry about it. So there is some interesting stuff happening there. And then the second question was what does that mean for traditional automakers? Is that fair? I think we're still at a point where traditional automakers have some time to. I don't think this is for all that Elon Musk says that this is going to be solved in a year or two. I just don't think that most experts would agree, and I do think there is time to catch up. But I would say, and I do think you see this, is that a lot of automakers are now talking about themselves as less in the space of selling cars and more in the space of selling mobility or selling mobility solutions or these various kinds of phrases. And I think that would be the thing I'd say is the lesson from that is more and more we should think less about the product because there are, there's some point in the future and we can find a wide range of experts saying a wide range of things, but there's some point in the future where cars will be more autonomous, where you'll be able to, where there'll be less and less need to own a car and more accessing cars like a service. And so to prepare for that shift away from ownership to access is, I think, the core lesson.
Right, any more questions? Otherwise, I'm just gonna try to link it back to your work, actually, because you started with Foresight. I think what Tesla has done is basically use the Foresight to portray the new image in the future. So I think from Elon Musk's perspective would be the social behavior will change, and with that, how Tesla can build up a new business model. And with that mindset, then would it be possible for Tesla to do something on top of it? To me, as a lecturer at university, doing the business theory, I think more like business strategies and then how to combine with the digital technology and how can the company exploit these sort of both worlds all together.
Yeah, and just to say about Tesla, I mean, one thing that Elon Musk had this really kind of a funny blog post, I think it's about 12 years old now, that was called Tesla's Super Secret Plan for Global Dominance, and it was posted publicly on their website. And the whole thing, it laid out their business model in a way that any competitor could have seen. They said, we're going to make a really high-end electric car, sell it for a lot of profit, use that profit to fund a less expensive but still pretty high-end electric car, make a lot of money from that, and then use that profit to sell a mass-market car. Now they have done literally, I mean, they didn't get all the timing right, and their profits seem to be slowing down, their issues and whatever, but they did pretty much exactly that. But it wouldn't have made sense on a short time horizon. Everyone sort of looked at it and said, well, you can't make an electric car work at $20,000 or $30,000 or whatever. So nobody would pay for it. But if you just gave yourself space to say, here's a 10-year plan to make this work, they made it work in a really remarkable way. So I think that's a great insight.
Okay, thank you very much. Please everyone join me to thank Mr. Brandon once again. Thank you. ตามกำหนดการนะครับ